Welcome back, friends, to Just Liberty, where liberty and justice meet. I'm Alan Reinach, President and General Counsel of the Church State Council, with my co-host Bettina Krause, editor of the oldest and best magazine devoted to religious liberty, celebrating 120 years. Bettina, this has been a lot of fun doing this podcast together, and this interview we're going to do next, this, my friends, is going to blow your minds. Make no mistake, you want to stay tuned for this one. And I'll turn it over to you, Bettina.
Today, we're delighted to have with us William Jones, who is an associate of the Future of Life Institute, which is an international nonpartisan organization that is working to steer technologies like artificial intelligence toward benefiting life and away from large-scale risks. Now, that's quite a mouthful. That's part of its mission statement, and we're going to be digging into that in the interview with Will today. But for now, Will, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.
Now, I have to admit, Will, this is not in my wheelhouse. We talk on this program mainly about constitutional law, and this is just not one of our usual topics, but I get the sense it is going to be thrust upon us in the years ahead, that we can't avoid it. So why don't you just give us a broad overview for those of us listening who aren't as tech savvy as you? How has AI developed over recent years?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it is worth echoing what you say, that it's been thrust upon everyone, and I think now it's so expansive that everyone in their different interests and expertise areas are having to contend with its implications for their own area. But yeah, just to give a brief recent history, I would say people talk about the modern era of AI really starting by some estimates a decade ago with sort of the founding of OpenAI and DeepMind in sort of 2014, 15. But really the breakthrough came, with the sort of GPT models that OpenAI have started putting out, and what we call large language models. So AI is much more than just ChatGPT. AI has been around for many decades. It goes back arguably to the Second World War with people like Alan Turing on my side of the pond, and the sort of early days of computing. But it meant lots of different things. It meant sort of very basic algorithms for a long time. Whereas the large language models that we now see with ChatGPT and those other models involved a scale of data collection and computing power and energy that hadn't been seen in previous eras. And it was largely those techniques combined with the scaling up of compute and data that led to these amazing breakthroughs that we've seen, mainly since 2023 when ChatGPT was released and GPT, well, end of 2022, I suppose, was ChatGPT released, but really in 2023, everyone sort of caught on to what was happening, and hundreds of millions of users quite quickly were exposed to this new era of AI, where in effect you have AI grown, you could say, rather than built on reams and reams of data, more than a human could ever consume, and then producing these results, these increasingly sophisticated results to our prompts, and breaking through all of these sort of benchmarks that we're trying to set. Experts are trying to find ways of benchmarking AI progress, and they're now struggling because it's expert level in so many different domains: sciences, mathematics, coding, writing. And as everyone will know, it now writes pretty good essay pretty quickly, and obviously this is having all sorts of impacts for education. But I think it gets to the heart of just how quickly AI is sort of smashing through all of these human benchmarks of different domains.
So I gather, Will, that your organization is focused on how to safeguard AI for positive uses, and we could quantify areas in which AI is expected to be very positive, like with medical and scientific research. But I've been reading a book off and on. It's a year or so old now, called The Coming Wave, and one of the
Mm.
premises of that book is there's no way to actually safeguard AI from the bad actors. And there are things that bad actors can do and, in all likelihood will do that can be catastrophic. So
Mm.
talk to us about, the kinds of things that your organization is focused on in terms of, risk assessment and risk aversion.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's right when it comes to what we call misuse risk, and certainly in certain national security settings, there are lots of concerns growing around how much the bar has been lowered in terms of availability of very powerful tools to bad actors, terrorists, and so on. And so you can quite easily imagine in not too long, a bad actor creating a bioweapon, a chemical weapon using AI, at quite low cost and inflicting that on a country. Also, the same goes for sort of cybersecurity concerns. But FLI, I think, also tries to draw attention to the pace of change and the thrust of the AI race, as people call it, between the sort of 5 or 6 top companies. What they're really racing towards is not just increasingly high capabilities or intelligence, you might say, but also agency, that is autonomy, systems that can do things without human input and without human oversight. And that's where you'd start talking not just about misuse, about some bad person deciding to do something with AI, but actually about loss of control scenarios, and AI itself kind of having all these unforeseen impacts. Again, not because AI is evil or because it has consciousness, which it is not likely to have, in my view, and doesn't need to have in order to get quite unwieldy. Because if something is more intelligent than us and able to manipulate us, as AI is increasingly able to do, we're seeing superhuman persuasion abilities among AI systems now increasingly, and also having that agency of setting itself goals and carrying out those goals. Currently online mostly, but increasingly applied to real world sort of physical capabilities. You can imagine it becomes easier to imagine how there are lots of sort of loss of control scenarios with devastating impacts. So I would say we try and have that distinction as well, of like misuse, but also loss of control threats.
That takes me back to the old movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, and loss of control of the computer HAL.
Boom.
Indeed,
Which
indeed, yeah. Hal is great because he doesn't actually have to be evil or conscious. He's just wants to continue the mission. And so it sort of decides something inside Hal, that lip reading the two pilots, that actually they are a threat to the mission, so he has to remove them. And so it's that sort of that's not too hard to imagine, I think, increasingly.
So your organization is focused on regulating or suggesting ways to regulate AI, but it seems to me that the pace that it's developing at kind of undercuts that goal, because I don't know if you've noticed, but the US government doesn't turn on a dime these days. It moves slowly, and global institutions work slowly. Um, and so, what is the likelihood of effective regulation being developed in time to meet the challenges that you're laying out?
Yeah, I wouldn't want to put a bet on it or a number, but I do think you're right that these developments are moving so quickly, and there's so many threats, new risks being introduced all the time, that for the federal government to respond with the requisite measures, is going to be quite the challenge. I would say, there are some who think that we're going to require some kind of Titanic, scenario or something to go horribly wrong before everyone's like wakes up and sees what needs to be done. I would argue that we were already seeing certain groups in the US responding to the harms that are emerging. One death is already too many, and there have been several from chatbot related situations. So people getting emotionally attached to a chatbot and then committing suicide, or running to try and reach a date with a fake girlfriend and dying, in the process. And increasingly, people, sort of teenagers and younger children being sort of very removed from the real world because of this. And I think parents are rightfully responding to that with some alarm. And so I think those, it's no longer the case that we're sort of having to persuade policymakers that that there are risks to AI down the road. It's actually no, they're hitting us right now, and they're being reeled out so fast. So I think you're seeing that coalition of parents, religious groups who care about those family issues, and are also concerned about some of the broader sort of trajectories of this, what seems to be a transhumanist project, as well as labor groups starting to wake up to what we alluded to, which is the replacement of human work by AI systems. The AI companies aren't shy about saying what they're aiming to do, which is to create systems that can replace all valuable economic labor. They're not just creating tools for us to use; they're trying to create replacements. So I think all these groups start to be activated in their own different way, and I guess the hope is that policy will start listening. And I think you are seeing certain politicians listening, but it's certainly an uphill battle to get past all the vested interests, as you say.
So you use the word transhumanism. Explain what you mean by that.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a very contested word. I think it's worth saying, and actually, it does go back to Christianity initially. It was sort of the idea of theosis, of being divinized, of being made, of God kind of saving us and then making us more than conquerors, as Paul says. But it was in the 20th century, it was very much detached from its religious roots and became this kind of separate, very atheist philosophy around using technology to improve and change human biology. So to sort of transcend what they see as the limitations and even the flaws of our human natures, which obviously Christians and other religions, regard as a somewhat sort of sacrilegious take, because while we do believe in salvation, we don't think it's technological. It's not going to be something that we can achieve by our own ends, if we can achieve it in this life at all. Whereas in Silicon Valley, you see, several major thinkers and CEOs making allusions to a singularity where AI, is going to sort of transform who we are, uploading our minds to the cloud and sort of transcending our bodies, a very Gnostic idea, or specific issues they see with humanity, like death. They regard it as a real shame that humans have a limited lifespan, and so radical life extension is one of the things they talk about AI helping us to achieve. So transhumanism sort of brackets a lot of these different strands, but at its heart, it's this fervent desire to use technology to change what we are as humans and sort of surpass what we currently are able to do.
So taking that thought from the end of life to the beginning of life issues, I think one of the concerns from a religious standpoint, from a moral standpoint, the convergence of AI and the CRISPR technology of sorting and manipulating DNA is the very real potential for a whole industry of designer babies, right?
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of kind of ethical rejection of this type of industry. But it strikes me that, whatever we can do, we will do. It will be done, regardless of, ethical or religious concerns. How do you see it, in these beginning of life issues and all, uh, does the Institute have any work that you're doing on how to regulate that sort of thing, and whether the regulations ultimately can really nip this in the bud?
Mm. Yeah, well, I would clarify to start with that Future of Life Institute is itself a non-partisan, non-religious organization. So my work for the institute involves supporting different religious groups, and in the US, primarily different Christian denominations, to come to these issues and be able to present their own viewpoints rooted in their own religious traditions. And I think something you alluded to was that different religious groups have growing concerns about some of the applications, even of quite narrow AI systems, and there seems to be a concern that we aren't able to opt out of those. And what we would really support at FLI is each group being able to express its own vision of the future and have the religious liberty to do so, even in an age where, as it looks like we're entering, there is a handful of people who have control over these enormously powerful tools, and may not have control over them for too much longer. But in any case, these are not systems that are created with Christian values. These are not systems that care about, you know, the life issues that you raise. I think these. If you look at the both the outputs of these systems, but also the values of the people creating them. Dario Amodei, head of Anthropic, which is one of the sort of, I would say, leading players in the AI race, wrote a piece last year called "Machines of Loving Grace," which was not a religious document, although it sounded like it. The title was slightly offensive to me as a Christian, but he was talking about what his AI systems are going to be able to do. And one of the things he was very excited about was AI being able to transform embryo selection processes. And he made no allusion to the fact that this is controversial for lots of us, namely Catholics. Not to say anything of Protestant groups. So I think that just gets at the religious liberty question there, and the lack of representation of more traditional and conservative Christian perspectives in the creation of these systems. Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier, Will, that there are some religious groups that are mobilizing on this issue. They are engaging with some of the challenges that you've just been talking about. Who are those groups and what are they doing? What are they saying?
Yeah, so I would say going a few years back, it seemed to be that the main groups that had addressed this were, perhaps not surprisingly, the most centralized ones. So the Vatican and the Catholic Church had several projects, from different dicasteries tackling different aspects of AI. So they had the Pontifical Academy of Science looking at what might the tools be that we can use here. Pontifical Academy of Life looking at more of the ethical questions. They had something called the Rome Call back in 2020, addressing some of these issues around AI systems, transparency, accountability, and so on. And then more recently have tried to take a slightly more strident stance on what are the concerns for human dignity. And both the late Pope Francis and now the new Pope Leo have addressed this concern that AI is going to be undermining fundamental human dignity. And also, Pope Leo has made quite clear that his name choice is an allusion to Pope Leo XIII, who famously wrote Rerum Novarum as a response to the Industrial Revolution. Pope Leo XIV now also mentioned labor issues. And so it seems like the church wants to position itself as being able to respond to these new questions around labor and dignity and technology fundamentally. But also you are seeing a growing number of Protestant groups in the US addressing these things. The Southern Baptist Convention had a statement a few years ago, which I think was quite prescient on some of these issues, talking not just about the risk of humans being replaced by what should remain a tool, but also the need for Christians to engage in policy and to engage in public discourse around the direction of this technology. At the beginning of this year, there was a statement from a group of DC think tanks, largely, but definitely coming from a Christian perspective, called Future for the Family. And I've been quite encouraged to see some of the groups come behind that, largely Catholic and evangelicals. And you've seen at some conservative gatherings since then in the US, this growing sort of coalition of concerns around the family issues that we already raised. My own work has also tried to support work, projects further afield. We had an event with African bishops, and they were also very concerned about a lot of these risks as well. So I like to think we're starting to see a groundswell of different religious engagement on these issues, but it does feel like early days in terms of the impact.
So, Will, let's take us down. I mean, we've been talking large scale risks and challenges. Let's go to the mundane. And I'm not sure whether your institute deals with this at all, but what are some of the issues or ethics, perhaps, that religious groups should be thinking about as they utilize AI tools? Because the only time that I've heard AI discussed is in the context of, the ethics of how it's used, when it's used. Is it okay to use it to generate an idea for a sermon or what have you? How should religious groups be thinking about their engagement?
Yeah, there's a lot for religious groups to unpack there, and I do worry that certain groups are rushing into applications that they don't really understand, particularly with things like using AI to write sermons. I mean, aside from, I guess, my personal feeling about that would be that doesn't seem like you're allowing the Spirit to guide your exegesis, if you like. But there's also the question of, again, the values within these systems. And their ability to hallucinate. These systems are not flawless. They are very impressive, and they can do lots of things faster than humans can. But they have been known to make all sorts of mistakes. And so if you're relying entirely on an AI system to write your sermon, you should definitely be very diligent about whether it's getting its Bible verses correct, and its references to all sorts of other texts that you might wish to draw on. I say, yeah, FLI doesn't take a stance on which tools, and which religions should use them. I think, again, we feel that should be up to each religion to choose, and I worry that some of these applications are kind of being foisted upon these groups without them really having a say in whether they want to use them. Certainly, when people talk about child usage, they note that a lot of the time the children aren't seeking out these AI applications; they're just stumbling across them on online or on Snapchat. It has its own inbuilt AI product. I think there's a growing conversation around these different applications within different faiths. John Piper gave quite a sort of bold speech where he said, if you get an AI to write a prayer, the Spirit isn't active in that. So, he wasn't necessarily saying don't use it for worship at all, but I think that got some people thinking about, actually, do I want to just rush into using that, or is that making me more reliant on technology when actually faith is a space where people want to escape from the modern world and want to be countercultural in all these different ways? So it's a very live debate. I think something I've been nervous about has been the growth of deepfakes of religious news online, and certainly I've seen entire YouTube pages dedicated to fake stories around the Catholic Church, or things that the Pope has said, or evangelicals fighting each other, and all these things that are totally fake, sludge or slop, as people call it. And I don't think Christians are entirely aware of just how much of it is fake. And I think that needs to be equally another conversation that congregations start having, and pastors and priests start being more open about these kind of false teaching that can lead people astray ultimately. And as we go forward, I think that's going to be the thing that I'm personally sort of worry about is the ability of AI systems to manipulate believers away from their faith or away from their convictions through very subtle, gradual processes. I mean, we've seen with social media algorithms how they can sort of slant people's opinions over time. Now you have a chatbot that is adjusting in real time to your particular emotional situation, to your entire internet history, to everything you've ever read, everything you've consumed, and making the perfect argument to sway you this way or that. Again, underpinned by a secular transhumanist or atheist, at the very least, worldview, and often not even doing the things that the programmers wanted it to do. I don't think the AI companies intended for people to commit suicide from their models, but that's starting to happen. And so I think you could see quite quickly mass hysteria, mass delusion, all sorts of flocks being led astray. I would say by these like superhuman persuasion capabilities that the AIs are developing. So that's sort of, again, to take it broader than you were asking about, but certainly you can see in the individual cases, people who are already alienated, already lonely, or in need of spiritual guidance, but afraid to go to a church or afraid to talk to someone, turning to these AI capabilities and getting far from the truth, should we say.
So now, this discussion my head is exploding with more questions than we have time for. But let me focus on this one. Back when calculators came in, there was all of this sort of negative energy and concern about, oh, well, kids aren't going to be able to learn, actually do calculations, do math, because the calculators are doing it for them. Fast forward, one of the, when I was a kid, I read, all the science fiction I could get a hold of, and a lot of it was actually very, very brilliant. But in one story, humanity had developed because of technology and all, to where we were these larger heads and very atrophied bodies, because our only interaction was through the computer screens, right? So that was one extreme. But what you're describing, I think, is the potential for sort of the dehumanizing of people, of because the computer is doing so much, because the AI is doing so much for us that we would otherwise have done for ourselves, we don't know how to do it anymore, right? We're completely reliant on AI, and that makes us vulnerable in ways, but also vulnerable to being manipulated, I think. um I, I I'm having a hard time even articulating the question, because it just it seems like the potential for uh transforming or degrading the human experience is, apart from all the things that it can do that are beneficial, just that
Yeah.
kind of society is
Yeah. Yeah, I would say even if some of the risks we've been talking about are averted, it does look like we're entering a world where all the good that is done, all the productivity, all the achievements, if we have them, are not our own,
Yeah.
and that poses all sorts of questions around agency and meaning. What's your purpose in life if everything you do is kind of actually not done by you and not done by any human. And so I certainly think you're seeing large groups of people who are alienated from society in the first place, and then add on to that, they don't feel they have any valuable work they can do. Children in school are already using AI to write all of their essays. So I think even in those good cases, we're gradually seeding decision making, relationships, bringing up our children. Even some people are talking about to AIs, and we start to wonder what our purpose is. I think Christians and other religions have a longer tradition of writing about what is the right way for someone to live, like not just settling for what's easiest or what's sort of cheapest or most efficient, but actually what cultivates virtue, what orients us towards the good, what's the best way for a community to thrive, for the glory of God and for the longer term, ultimately to create children and to bring them up. And that's certainly not always focused on kind of doing as little work as possible. And certainly some of the Catholic writing around work would suggest that we need to be doing some kind of activity in our lives. And all sorts of Christians would look to certain models. Adam and Eve are set to work in the garden, and that's pre-fall. God isn't saying we're sort of set there to just kind of rest on our laurels. Right. So I think, it does raise all these questions, even if we avoid, a disastrous event in the next few years.
My day job, as it were, I represent workers who lose their jobs because of religious discrimination. And over many years of doing this, especially with my male clients, when I'm trying to help them express the emotional trauma of losing their jobs, part of that is, helping them come to grips with the fact that work for men is an enormous source of meaning and purpose. It's a very important part of our identity. And if you take that away, it's very, very traumatic. So, where this is going is, I think, there's a lot more to it than bioweapons or, hacking, digital systems, and, the Russians or the North Koreans stealing our crypto, right?
Indeed. And I think all these things are, require much more honest conversation. I mean, sometimes the tech leaders are honest about their concerns. Some of the tech leaders, have been talking about job bloodbaths, coming up. 50% of sort of entry level jobs going away in one estimation. And I don't think that we're remotely prepared for that, for those changes. And I also think it's a great opportunity for religious groups to come forward and say, we have a better vision, we have a more inspiring vision of the future than what is being presented to us. We don't have to reject technology entirely, but we need to harness it for the good and think about what that means in the longer term for all these sort of other concerns that are not necessarily captured by the profit margin of these companies. And I don't think we're seeing that currently, but I am optimistic that as these harms become more apparent and more people start to wrestle with the kind of questions that you were talking about, we will see a more serious conversation, a more sort of grown-up conversation, which obviously then has policy implications for governance.
This has just been a fascinating conversation. I have learned so much, but I'm wondering whether it could lead some of our listeners to simply feel helpless. I mean, what can they do given the fact that so much power is concentrated in the hands of so few? These are massive systems outside their control. As we finish, what would you say to listeners in terms of how they can engage with this issue in a productive way?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely resonate with that response, and I think it is tempting sometimes to wonder what impact one could possibly have, given that power concentration. I think the first thing is to be honest about it. I don't think you can bury your head in the sand, and I don't think it's going to do religious communities any good longer term to sort of pretend that these things aren't happening. As the sort of adage goes, we might not care about AI. People might not be computer scientists, but AI cares about us. Not in a true sense, because AI doesn't care about anything. But these issues are coming for us.
Right.
I think FLI takes the view that this will require both public policy and also public ethics, a more rigorous public debate. And there are certain policy measures that people, if they are in the right line of work or if they're interested in doing that, I think they should pursue, or at least try and communicate to their policymakers, to their governors, that this is an issue of concern for them, because actually a lot of the time, congressmen and senators are just not well informed about a lot of this, and so they need to be made aware that their voters care about this stuff. But even if we get that, even if we sort of have policy success, there's going to be all these other issues that people have to contend with on a day-to-day basis, a sort of constant negotiation with all of these changes in our relationships, in how we carry out our sort of work, where we personally are going to draw the lines with technology. I mean, you've already seen this with the social media conversation, but people deciding not to give their kids smartphones at all, or what's called the tech exit, or deciding to change the sort of community that they build around them, realizing that we're not actually islands, and that we can't live sort of fully online. We have to, reject the sort of virtual reality future that Mark Zuckerberg seems to want for us. And actually, but rather than just rejecting it and despairing about the fact that it looks like that might win, we have to provide this alternative, and we have to strive towards an alternative vision of the good, which I would sort of suggest is best rooted in a religious tradition, or at least for religious people. I'm not trying, I'm sort of here to proselytize necessarily, but I do think, at least in my own culture in the UK, and I think this is true in the US as well, it's a time of both rapid technological change, but also, and related to that, sort of spiritual questioning. A crisis of meaning, some people are calling it, and that's a great moment for people to rediscover their religious heritage and religious traditions, and actually find better answers there to some of the technological questions than they would from secular sources. So that's not like a direct practical thing, except that I think there are many layers in which people can engage with this, and so I think more writing and thinking and discussing among local communities is going to be as crucial to reaching a better world in the future, one in which we can continue to pursue happiness and the good. That's going to be as vital as these sort of high level policy dynamics that most people feel they probably can't necessarily do a great deal about.
We could carry on this conversation for a long time, and I have a feeling, Will, that we're going to have to renew it again in the future. This has been really not just eye-opening, but I have to say it's been kind of inspiring to me. So thank you so much for being with us.
Well, no, thank you so much. And I'm glad it wasn't entirely depressing, as these issues sometimes can be. Thank you so much.
Well, Alan, that was an interview like we've never done before.
I'll say.
And I think we had different reactions, because I felt it was quite a downer, but you said you were inspired. Why were you inspired?
Well, okay, I agree. The future with AI is enormously depressing. But what I came away with was we have to focus on building community, real community. And I was reminded that, that series that was done about the blue zones, and I think it's still on Netflix, when they're examining what contributes to the longest lived people, the longest lived communities across many different cultures. Community is really, really important, that there's human connectedness, that there's music, that there's, food, social gatherings, right? How often do we not know our neighbors, right? We don't even know the people that are living next door to us. So I think that, to the extent that we react to, the focus on online community by building actual community, I'm reminded of this Bible verse. Do not forsake the assembling of yourselves together, and all the more as you see the day approaching, right? So, we see the day approaching, and so I think that it can be motivating to really find what is the best, what makes us human, and to pursue that, right? Because I see AI as so dehumanizing it. And who of us hasn't had frustrations dealing with, you know, customer service loops that you just can't get out of, and you just can't, you just can't navigate. And it's just, the AI can just be so mind numbing, right?
Yeah. No, that's an interesting point, Alan. So the fact that our sense of community is being threatened so profoundly by this technology may be a wake-up call for us. Alan, I guess what I really took away from this was that we as faith communities can't afford to be silent on this issue. It's not one that's going away. It's not one that's really comfortably within our area of authority historically, but we don't get a choice. We need to engage with it and bring our faith values to bear on how to deal with it, right?
We do. And I'm going to maybe close this discussion with something that, maybe a little bit speculative, but, as I think about sort of signs of the times, and as an Adventist, we've always believed that the return of Christ is imminent, albeit there's been a number of generations of Adventists that have had that hope disappointed. The idea that we will begin as human beings to manipulate the genetic code to the point where we're creating designer babies. I just have a real hard time believing that the Lord's going to let it go that far. I just, I don't have a thus saith the Lord. I don't have any, biblical basis for this. It just, and maybe I'm just, a modern day Luddite, so to speak, and unreasonably hostile to this new technology. It's, but that's just kind of the way I feel about it. I don't believe that God is going to let us play God in designing our babies.
Well, this discussion is to be continued. So, listeners, thanks for joining us for another episode of Just Liberty. And remember, until next time, eternal vigilance is the price of liberty.